Prince expelled the young woman who crashed the ball, but when he saw the necklace around her neck, the chandeliers blazed with such brilliance that the air itself seemed to shimmer. Music swelled beneath the painted ceilings of Château de Beaumont, violins rising and falling like waves over silk. Laughter rang from every corner, the scent of sugared fruits and candle wax filling the ballroom. Ladies in satin gowns glided across the marble floor, their gloved hands lifted in practiced grace, and through the golden doors stepped a girl who did not belong. Elise kept her head lowered, her pulse pounding against the borrowed lace of her collar. She could feel the weight of 100 glances pressing down upon her as she crossed the threshold. Every inch of the room glittered with wealth and elegance, and she, daughter of no one, servant of a minor household, felt as though she had entered a world forbidden to her. The gown she wore had been lent by her mistress, the Baroness of Rouvre, who slept unaware of its absence. Elise's fingers trembled as she clutched its skirts, praying no one would look too closely at the frayed seams. She had not come for pleasure. She had come for truth. Somewhere within these walls, behind one of these smiling faces, lay the name her mother had whispered on her deathbed, a name spoken with equal parts love and sorrow. Beaumont. Elise had carried that name in her heart like a wound ever since. And when she heard of the grand ball that would gather every noble in the province, she knew it might be her only chance to find someone who could tell her what her mother's last words truly meant. "Your card, mademoiselle?" The usher's voice startled her. I seem to have misplaced it," she murmured. His brow furrowed. Before he could question her further, a group of young courtiers swept past, their laughter filling the space between them. Elise slipped forward quickly, blending with the movement of the crowd before the usher could stop her. She tried to steady her breathing. Her eyes scanned the room, searching faces, badges, coats of arms embroidered on sleeves. Her gaze caught one in particular, the golden crest of the Beaumont family, a soaring lark encircled by laurels. It adorned the banner behind the orchestra and the uniform of the tall man standing near it, Prince Julien de Beaumont. He was younger than she had imagined, no more than 30, with an air of authority that seemed to command even the chandeliers to shine for him. His profile was sharp, proud, the bearing of a man who had never been told no. The court adored him. Elise could see it in the way people leaned toward him, eager to please. But she also saw something else, something only a servant's daughter might notice, a quiet weariness behind his gaze. She watched as he turned to greet a duchess with a polite smile, his tone charming but detached. He looked as though every compliment cost him effort. Elise wondered what grief could hide beneath such control. She remembered her mother's voice again, faint and trembling, the Beaumont name. "You must know the truth, child." Her heart urged her forward. "Elise, you fool," she whispered to herself. "You cannot speak to a prince." But fate, mischievous and sudden, decided for her. The crowd shifted as the first dance ended. A jostle from behind sent her stumbling forward. Her shoulder brushed the prince's arm. A goblet of wine spilled between them, crimson staining the hem of her borrowed gown. Gasps rippled around the circle. Elise froze. Prince Julien turned slowly, surprise giving way to indignation. "Who is this?" His voice carried easily over the music, clear and commanding. "I beg your pardon, your highness," Elise stammered, curtsying so low her knees trembled. "It was an accident." "An accident," repeated one of the courtiers, laughter tinged with malice. "How unfortunate." Julian's dark eyes swept her from head to toe. The silk was fine, but the posture betrayed her. Too humble, too fearful. Not of noble breeding. "I do not recall inviting you," he said evenly. Elise's voice faltered. Your name," he demanded. "I am Elise." "Elise what?" She hesitated. The silence stretched. Laughter tittered again from the edges of the circle. "I am Elise Laurent, your highness." "Laurent?" He glanced at his aide. "Is there a family of that name in the province?" "None that I know of, sire," came the reply. Julian's gaze sharpened. "Then perhaps you might explain how you came to attend a royal gathering." Her hands twisted in the folds of her gown. "I meant no harm. I sought only—" "You sought what?" His tone cut like glass. Her courage faltered. but she forced herself to speak. A truth that concerns the Beaumont family. The words fell into the hush like a pebble into water. Eyes widened. A lady gasped behind her fan. Julian's brows drew together. "You come uninvited into my home to speak of my family's affairs?" "I had nowhere else to turn," she said, voice trembling. He stepped closer, so near she could see the faint scar at his jawline. "Do you know the meaning of respect, mademoiselle? Or has your curiosity blinded you to it?" Murmurs rose among the nobles. Disdainful, mocking. Someone whispered, "A beggar in borrowed silk." Julian heard it and did not silence them. He should have. Perhaps later he would wish he had. But in that moment, wounded pride drove him. "Guards," he said coldly. "Remove this intruder." 2 soldiers stepped forward. Elise's breath caught. "Please, Your Highness," she pleaded. "If you would only hear me." He turned away. "I have no patience for liars." Hands seized her arms. She struggled, but they were firm. The crowd parted as she was led toward the door. Shame burned through her like fire. Then, light. A glint of gold flickered at her throat as she lifted her chin, refusing to bow her head. The pendant slipped from beneath her collar, catching the glow of 100 candles. It was small, shaped like a lark in flight, its wings etched with intricate detail. Julian's breath stopped. The room seemed to tilt. "Wait." His voice came rough, unsteady. The guards halted. He stared at the necklace as though it were a ghost. Memory struck him like a blow. The pendant his mother had worn every day of his childhood, the one that had vanished the night she died. He remembered her laughter, the soft glimmer of that very charm resting against her skin. "Where did you get that?" he demanded. Elise blinked in confusion. "This? It was my mother's." "Your mother?" His tone sharpened. "Who was she?" She hesitated. "She served in a noble house, long ago. She spoke of a lady she loved and protected. A lady of Beaumont." The words stole the air from his lungs. He felt the eyes of the entire court upon him. His hands clenched at his sides. He wanted to ask more, yet pride and disbelief tangled in his throat. "Impossible," he muttered. That pendant was lost. Elise's eyes filled with tears. "It was never lost to me." The silence stretched, heavy and strange. The music had long stopped. Every noble in the hall stood frozen, watching the prince, waiting for his command. Julian's mind swirled with questions he could not voice. How could this girl possess the very token that had disappeared with his mother's death? What deceit was this? And yet somewhere beneath the confusion, something else stirred. Fear. Fear of what he might learn. He took a step forward. "Your mother's name," he demanded. Elise's lips parted, but no sound came. Her voice had fled. The guard still held her arms. The prince's gaze bore into her, sharp as a blade. "Tell me," he said. "Who was she?" "Marie," Elise whispered finely. "Marie Laurent." The name struck him like thunder. His mother's lady-in-waiting had borne the same name. The woman who had vanished the night of the tragedy. The woman whom rumor claimed had stolen from the princess before disappearing into the storm. Julian's pulse roared in his ears. He wanted to speak, to question, to shout that this could not be, but pride and confusion chained him. "Enough," he said at last, forcing his voice to steady. "Take her out." "Your Highness!" "Out!" The doors opened wide. A rush of cold night air swept through the ballroom. Elise was led across the marble floor, her bare shoulders trembling beneath the borrowed silk. She turned once, her eyes meeting the prince's. For a fleeting instant he thought he saw not defiance but sorrow there, a sorrow that mirrored his own. Then she was gone, swallowed by the darkness beyond the gates. The murmurs began at once. A countess whispered, "Did you see the pendant?" Another replied, "The very likeness of the late princess's charm." A third added, "Perhaps the girl is mad." Julian said nothing. He walked toward the balcony, away from their gossip, his heart pounding with a confusion he could not name. The night beyond glittered with frost. Somewhere out there, the girl disappeared into the snow, the pendant gleaming like a spark in the dark. He pressed his hands against the cold stone railing, eyes fixed on the distant road. For years, He had silenced questions about his mother's death. The doctors had called it an illness, but he had never believed them. Too many servants had vanished. Too many letters had been burned. And now, a stranger wearing her pendant. He turned sharply to his aide. "Did you hear her name?" "Yes, sire. Elise Laurent." "Find her," Julien said. His voice was low, urgent. "Before dawn." The aide hesitated. "Sire, she may already be far gone. It is snowing." "Then ride through the snow," Julien snapped. "Bring her back." "But, Your Highness, she has shamed herself before the court." "I do not care," Julien interrupted. "That necklace—" His voice broke slightly, and he forced it steady again. "It belonged to my mother." The aide stared at him, uncertain whether to question or obey. But the prince's expression left no room for doubt. When he was alone again, Julien stared into the glittering ballroom. The dancers had resumed their waltz as though nothing had happened, but the air no longer seemed golden to him. Every chandelier burned too bright, every note of music too loud. He saw in his mind the look on Elise's face as she was dragged away, the mixture of fear and dignity that no pretense could fake. He thought of the name she had spoken, Marie Laurent, the woman who had once held him as a child, who had sung to him when his mother was too ill to rise, the woman who had vanished without farewell. He whispered to the empty hall, "It cannot be." Yet deep inside, he already knew that it could. The violins played on, their melody bittersweet. The prince's gaze returned to the doorway where Elise had stood, and a thought came unbidden, soft but relentless. If she is telling the truth, then everything I have believed about that night is a lie. His pulse quickened. He turned toward the waiting aide, his voice a low command. "Find her. Bring her back. That necklace belongs to my mother." Snow fell silently over the countryside as dawn approached. The wind carried a brittle cold that bit through Elise's thin cloak. Her slippers, soaked and torn, left faint prints on the frozen path leading away from the chateau. She did not look back. The humiliation of the night still burned too fiercely in her chest. She could still hear the laughter, the whispers, the prince's sharp voice cutting through her plea. Every step away from the castle felt like an escape from a nightmare. But the pendant against her throat felt heavy now, almost accusing. She pressed it in her palm as she walked. "Why did you bring me here, Mama?" she whispered. "What truth could be worth such shame?" When her strength gave out, she collapsed near a small farmhouse by the woods. A light flickered in one window. After a long hesitation, she knocked. The door opened to reveal a widow with gray hair and kind eyes. "Child, you'll freeze," the woman said, ushering her inside without question. Elise warmed her hands by the fire, too weary to explain much. She only said she'd lost her way, and the widow, Madame Colette, asked nothing more. By morning, Elise helped her with chores, grateful for the shelter. She told herself she would leave by sunset, find work, start anew. The chateau was behind her now, and whatever mystery her mother had left would remain buried. It was better that way. But fate, once again, had other plans. At the chateau, Prince Julien had not slept. The words of the night replayed endlessly. The girl's trembling voice, the name she spoke, the pendant gleaming like memory reborn. When his aide returned near dawn, the prince met him in the corridor. "Did you find her?" "We traced her steps to the forest road, sire. Villagers say a young woman passed toward the southern hills. She may be hiding near Saint Laurent. Then that's where I'll go." The aide blinked. "Your Highness." "Alone." Julien's jaw tightened. "If the court learns I am chasing a servant girl through the countryside, they will laugh for a century. So I go alone." He ordered a plain horse saddled and traded his fine coat for a simple one. When the sun rose, no one noticed the solitary rider leaving through the servants' gate. By afternoon, the snow eased. He reached the village just as the bells tolled noon. Children ran beside the road, chasing the stranger with curious eyes. Julien dismounted before the bakery, scanning the street. "Do you know of a girl, young, with fair hair and a worn gown?" he asked the baker's wife. She shrugged. "There's a girl at Madame Colette's farm. Came last night half frozen." He thanked her and rode on. At the cottage, Madame Colette looked up from her washing as the rider approached. "Good day, monsieur," she greeted. "Good day. I seek a girl who may be under your roof," he said. "Her name is Elise." The widow frowned slightly. "She is resting." "She's no thief, sir, if that's what you've come to claim." Julian hesitated, suddenly aware of how absurd this all seemed. "I have no wish to harm her, only to speak." Madame Colette studied him, then nodded toward the barn. "She's feeding the hens. You may find her there." He crossed the yard quietly, boots crunching on frost. Inside the barn, Elise stood with her back to him, scattering seed from a small basket. The sunlight slanted through the slats, touching her hair with pale gold. When she turned and saw him, the basket slipped from her hands. "You? Elise," he said softly. "I had to find you." She stepped back, disbelief on her face. "After what you did, you humiliated me before them all. What more could you possibly want?" "I was wrong," he said quickly. "I acted in pride. But that pendant, where did you get it?" She pressed a hand protectively over it. "Why should I tell you?" "You've already called me a liar." He drew a slow breath. "Because that pendant belonged to my mother. It vanished the night she died. Tell me how you came to have it." Elise's eyes filled with confusion and guarded pain. "It was my mother's. She said it was a gift, from the woman she served at Beaumont. I never knew more." "Your mother served at Beaumont?" "Yes, years ago. Her name was Marie Laurent." Julian felt the truth closing around him like a trap. "My mother's lady-in-waiting bore that same name. She disappeared the night of my mother's death." Elise's expression faltered. "Then you think my mother stole from her?" He shook his head. "I don't know what to think. That is why I came. To learn the truth." Silence filled the barn except for the rustle of the hens. Elise turned away, fighting tears. "The truth cost my mother everything. She fled because she feared for my life. Even on her deathbed, she said we must never return to Beaumont." Julian's tone softened. "Why?" She never said. Only that the lady she served was kind, and that evil surrounded her. "She told me to keep this necklace safe, no matter what." He studied her face, searching for deceit and finding none. "If what you say is true, then your mother may have been the only loyal friend my mother had." Elise looked at him uncertainly. "Then why do you still look at me as if I were guilty?" "Because the pieces don't fit," he admitted quietly. "If your mother was loyal, why did she vanish? Why was the pendant never found?" "Because someone wanted her gone," Elise said, her voice trembling. "And she took the pendant to protect whoever it endangered." Julian frowned, considering. The barn door creaked as the wind pushed against it. "If there is danger still hidden in that story, it touches us both. Come back to the chateau. Help me uncover it." Elise stared at him in disbelief. "You want me to return to the place where you shamed me?" "I will make it right," he said firmly. "You have my word." She shook her head. "Your word is worth little to me." He took a step closer. "Then take this instead." He drew from his pocket a silver ring, the seal of Beaumont. "If anyone dares speak against you, show them this. They will answer to me." Her breath caught. "You would risk your name for me." "I would risk it for the truth," he said, "and perhaps for something more." The way he looked at her then made her chest tighten. She glanced away, unable to speak. After a long moment, she nodded. "Very well, but I come as myself, not as your subject." "Agreed." They left the cottage at dusk. Madame Colette stood in the doorway, watching them with quiet curiosity. "Mind your heart, child," she said softly, as Elise mounted behind the prince. "Pride can wound deeper than any blade." Elise did not answer. The horses' hooves struck the frozen ground, carrying them back toward the chateau. The ride was silent, except for the wind. At last, Julienne spoke. "When I was a boy, my mother wore that pendant every day. She said the lark was a symbol of truth, that it always rises, no matter how heavy the storm." Elise's fingers brushed the charm unconsciously. "Then perhaps it has risen again," she said. By the time they reached the castle, night had fallen. The guard stared in astonishment as the prince dismounted with the same girl he had ordered cast out. No one dared question him. Julian led her through a side passage to the library, a room lined with old books and sealed drawers. A fire crackled weakly in the hearth. "You will stay here tonight," he said. "Tomorrow we begin." Begin what? The search for what really happened the night my mother died. Elise sank into a chair. Exhaustion mingled with unease. And if you find that my mother was part of it? Then I will hear her story before I judge. She looked at him a long moment. You speak differently now. I was taught arrogance as duty, he replied quietly. You showed me what it costs. She felt a strange ache at his words, but said nothing. The fire flickered between them, softening the edges of anger. Morning brought whispers through the corridors. Servants carried the tale like wildfire. The prince had brought back the intruder. Some said she had bewitched him, others that she was a secret heir. Julien ignored them all. He summoned the steward and ordered access to the family archives. Together, he and Elise spent hours sifting through letters, ledgers, and sealed records. The handwriting of the late princess appeared again and again, delicate and graceful. Elise traced one line with her fingertip. She wrote of loneliness, she murmured. And fear, Julien nodded. She was ill for months before her death, but I never believed it was illness alone. What do you think it was? He hesitated. Poison, perhaps. Or betrayal. Her hand trembled. You think someone in your own family? He met her gaze. I think my aunt, the Dowager Duchess, had reasons to wish my mother gone. She gained control of the estate after her death. Elise felt a chill. Then she would not welcome our search. No, he said grimly. Which is why we will continue quietly. Days passed. The prince's demeanor changed. The servants whispered of it. He no longer attended court dinners or hunts. Instead, he spent long hours with the mysterious young woman in the library. Some said she was a scholar sent by the crown. Others believed she was a ghost returned to haunt the Beaumonts. Elise cared little for the gossip. Each document they uncovered brought her closer to her mother's shadow. A letter sealed with blue wax caught her attention one evening. Look, she said. This is not the princess's hand. Julien studied it. It belongs to my father's secretary. He vanished soon after the funeral. The letter contained only one line. The lark must fly before the storm breaks. Beneath it, an initial, M. Marie, Elise whispered. It must be her. Julien's heart raced. Then your mother knew something terrible. They read on. Hidden among the pages was a list of accounts, debts owed by the Duchess herself. Gold lent and never returned. A scandal that would have ruined her if the princess had spoken of it. Elise looked up slowly. If your mother threatened to expose her, Julien finished for her. Then the Duchess silenced her and blamed your mother to erase the witness. The truth hung between them, fragile and painful. Elise's eyes glistened. All these years, my mother carried that burden alone. Julien reached across the table. Then let us finish what she began. Their fingers brushed. For a heartbeat, the world seemed still. Then a sound shattered it, the creak of a door. Elise turned. A servant stood trembling at the threshold. Your Highness, he whispered, the Dowager Duchess requests your presence in her chambers. She says she has heard troubling rumors. Julien's jaw tightened. Tell her I will come shortly. When the servant left, Elise whispered. She knows. She suspects, he said, standing, which means we are close. Elise rose as well. Be careful. If she truly is guilty, she will not let you expose her. He met her gaze. I have lived too long under her shadow. It ends now. She wanted to stop him, but the determination in his face left no room for argument. He turned to the door, pausing only once. Stay here. Whatever happens, do not follow me. But Elise knew her heart would not obey. As soon as he was gone, she moved to the window, watching the corridor beyond. The fire flickered low, casting long shadows on the walls. She felt a strange foreboding settle in her chest. Minutes passed. Then an echo of footsteps sounded in the hall, heavy, deliberate. Elise moved toward the door, every instinct screaming that something had gone wrong. When she reached for the handle, a voice drifted through the crack, low, familiar, and sharp. The Dowager Duchess. And she was not alone. Julien realized the impossible truth. The servant Elise spoke of could only have been his mother's lady-in-waiting, who disappeared the same night his mother died. The air in the chateau had changed. Servants moved with quiet steps, as if the corridors themselves were listening. Elise waited in the library, pacing near the dying fire. The shadows on the walls swayed with every flicker of the flame. She could hear faint voices somewhere beyond the door. Julian's deep tone, the colder one of a woman who spoke like she had nothing to fear. Elise pressed her ear to the crack of the door. The conversation carried through the corridor, sharp and controlled. "You bring a stranger into this house," the Duchess said. "A girl of no name, no title. Do you wish to destroy what little respect remains for our family?" "I bring her because she carries proof of what you tried to bury," Julian answered. His tone was calm, but beneath it lay the edge of anger. "The pendant, the letters, the missing servants. Did you think they would never surface? You sound like a child haunted by bedtime stories. I sound like a son who lost his mother and now knows why." A silence followed. Long, brittle. Elise could almost hear the Duchess's controlled breath. "My dear nephew," the woman said at last, "you insult me with this nonsense. That pendant was stolen by a thief. Your mother was frail, consumed by jealousy and imagination. Her death was her own doing." Julian's reply came, low and fierce. "And Marie Laurent's disappearance? Was that her doing as well?" The Duchess's tone hardened. "You would trust the word of a girl who deceived her way into your ball over your own blood." "I trust what my eyes have seen." Elise's heart thudded. She knew she should not be listening, but she couldn't pull away. She heard a sudden movement, the rustle of heavy skirts, the sound of a hand striking wood. The Duchess's voice rose. "You are a fool, Julian. I have governed this house since your childhood. Everything you are, your rank, your influence, exists because I protected it. If you expose this, you will ruin us both. Then let the truth ruin me," he said. Elise gasped softly. The words felt like a door thrown open. For the first time, someone within those walls had chosen honesty over pride. Moments later, footsteps approached. She stepped back, just as Julian entered. His expression was strained but resolute. "She knows," Elise said. "She knows everything," he replied, "and she will not stop. We must act before she hides or burns what remains." "What do you mean to do?" "Find proof stronger than words," he said. "Something she cannot deny." They returned to the library together. Julian opened the locked cabinet near the hearth, a chest of personal records sealed after his mother's death. He forced the latch and drew out bundles of parchment, each tied with faded ribbon. Hours passed as they sorted through them. The air smelled of dust and old ink. Elise read aloud fragments of the late princess's diary. Most were gentle notes about garden walks, music, her son. But then her tone darkened in the later entries. "I hear them whispering outside my door. My sister-in-law has taken control of the servants. Marie warns me to be cautious. I have sealed the pendant as proof of trust." Elise looked up, voice trembling. She knew. "She feared your aunt." Julian's hands clenched. "And my father let it happen." They searched deeper until Elise found a folded sheet wedged inside a ledger. Its edges were singed, as though rescued from fire. Julian read aloud. "Should I not survive, I entrust the truth to Marie. The lark will guide the rightful heir to peace." They stared at the words together. Elise whispered, "The lark. That's the pendant." Julian nodded slowly. "And you were the one who brought it back." The door burst open suddenly. Julian rose, ready for another confrontation. But it was not the Duchess. It was the steward, pale and out of breath. "Your Highness," he stammered, "the Duchess has ordered the staff to burn all remaining letters from the late princess's chambers. She says they are infected with illness from years past." Julian's voice cut through him like ice. "Illness? She fears discovery, not disease. Stop them at once." The steward hesitated. "Forgive me, sire, but she commands as the head of the household." "Not anymore," Julian said. He strode from the room. Elise followed, her skirts brushing the marble floor. The corridor ahead glowed with firelight from a brazier at its end. Two servants stood before the Duchess's apartments, feeding bundles of papers into the flames. "Enough!" Julian's shout echoed. The servants froze. The Duchess turned, her expression smooth, unbothered. "Julian," she said, "surely you understand the need to destroy contagion. Old letters can carry terrible things." "Not as terrible as guilt." He seized a half-burnt document from the brazier, shaking off the ash. The faint writing still visible bore his mother's seal. "You would destroy her words to protect yourself." Her eyes narrowed. "You dare accuse me in front of servants, in front of anyone who will listen," he said. Elise moved closer, clutching the pendant in her hand. "Why did you fear this necklace so much, madame? What truth does it carry that frightens you?" The Duchess's gaze landed on her, sharp and scornful. "You again. I should have had you removed from this house the moment you returned." Julian stepped between them. "You will not speak to her that way." The Duchess's voice turned cold. "Have you fallen so low that you defend a peasant girl against your own kin?" He met her eyes steadily. "I defend innocence against cruelty. If that makes me low, so be it." The Duchess's hand trembled at her side. For a moment, Elise thought she might strike him. Instead, the older woman gave a thin, bitter smile. "You believe you seek justice, but when you uncover what truly happened, you will regret your zeal. The truth destroys more than lies ever could." "Then let it destroy me," he said again. The Duchess turned away, sweeping down the corridor with measured grace, leaving behind the stench of burned paper. When she was gone, Julian looked at the half-burned letter in his hands. "She is terrified," he said. "That means we are close." Elise studied the damaged page. The words were faint, but one sentence stood out. "The key lies beneath the mirror, where truth cannot hide." Julian frowned. "The mirror? There's a large one in your mother's old chamber," Elise said. "Perhaps she hid something behind it." They went at once. The chamber had been sealed for years. Dust veiled the furniture like forgotten snow. The great mirror stood against the wall, its surface dull. Julian stepped before it and ran his fingers along the frame. Something clicked. A small compartment opened behind the lower panel, revealing a bundle wrapped in silk. Inside lay a sealed letter, unburned. Julian broke the wax. The princess's handwriting leapt from the page, clear and steady. "To my son should this find you. Beware the hand that wears the crest of Beaumont without right. My sister by marriage covets what is yours. Marie carries the proof hidden in the lark. Trust her, for she will one day lead you home." Julian closed his eyes briefly, the weight of the truth settling over him. "My mother knew she was betrayed." Elise's throat tightened. "And my mother was her protector. She carried that proof all her life." He looked at her, and something in his expression softened. "Then she saved me before I ever knew you existed." Their gazes held. The silence between them was charged, tender, dangerous. Then the door creaked open once more. It was the steward again, voice trembling. "Your Highness, forgive me. The Duchess commands all of us to leave the East Wing. She says the structure is unsafe, but I think—" He hesitated. "I think she means to lock you inside." Julian's face hardened. "So be it. We have the proof we need. She cannot silence me now." Elise caught his arm. "You must be careful. She has influence beyond these walls. If she feels cornered, she will act without mercy." "I am no longer her ward," he said. "I am the Prince of Beaumont." He left the chamber with determined steps. Elise followed, despite his warning. Together they crossed the great hall, where the Duchess awaited, surrounded by nobles she had summoned under pretense of an urgent council. "My friends," she announced, "my nephew has been deceived by a schemer. This woman," she pointed at Elise, "claims false ties to our family and poisons the prince's mind with dangerous fantasies." Elise drew herself upright. "I claim only what the truth reveals. Your late sister-in-law's words speak for themselves." She held up the letter. The Duchess's color drained for a fraction of a second before returning. "A forgery," she said coolly. Julian stepped forward. "The seal is genuine, as is the hand. My mother named Marie-Laurent her protector. This girl is her daughter. It is you, Aunt, who deceived us." A wave of murmurs rippled through the gathered nobles. The Duchess stood frozen, her mask cracking at last. "You would destroy your own family's honor with gossip?" You destroyed it when you conspired against her, Julian said. You sought power at the cost of blood. Her lips trembled with fury, but she said nothing. The silence that followed was heavier than any shout. Elise turned to the assembled guests. My mother fled not out of guilt, but to save the prince's life. She carried this pendant as proof, waiting for the day when truth would rise. Julian lifted the pendant in his hand. The golden lark glimmered beneath the chandeliers. My mother's symbol of truth, he said. The lark has flown back to Beaumont. The Duchess took one step back, her voice low. You think this will end well for you? The court does not forgive weakness. Then I will no longer seek its forgiveness, Julian said. The chamber filled with whispers again. The Duchess turned sharply and swept out, her dignity intact, but her control broken. When the doors closed behind her, Julian let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Elise looked up at him. It's over? He shook his head slowly. Not yet. She will retreat to gather her strength, but she cannot undo what has been revealed. They remained there a moment. The room hushed around them. Then Elise whispered, What will become of you now? Whatever the truth allows, he said. They spent the night sorting the recovered papers, preparing them for the council that would be held the next morning. Tired yet determined, they worked side by side until dawn's light crept through the tall windows. Elise's head drooped once, and Julian caught her before she could fall asleep at the table. Rest, he said gently. I will not, she murmured. Not until your mother's name is cleared. He smiled faintly. Then we share the same vow. As he reached to steady the candle, his hand brushed hers. The small contact was enough to send a quiet warmth through both of them. Neither spoke. The bells of the chateau struck 8. Julian gathered the letters, tying them with fresh ribbon. We will present them to the council. They will have no choice but to believe. Elise looked out the window, watching the morning mist rise. And if they choose not to, then we walk into exile with our truth intact, he said. She turned to him, meeting his eyes. You would give up your title? For honor, yes. Their silence was interrupted by the sound of approaching steps. The door opened once more, and there she was. The Duchess, pale but composed, her eyes cold as winter. She spoke without pretense. So this is what my household has become. A court of traitors led by a servant girl and a naive prince. Julian straightened. Say what you came to say. Her voice sharpened. You have forced my hand. If you bring those papers before the council, you will expose not only me but your father's memory. Do you wish to brand your own blood with shame? My father's silence allowed your treachery, he said. I will not honor that silence any longer. She took one slow step closer, lowering her voice. You think the world will applaud your righteousness. It will not. It will destroy you. Elise stepped forward. Truth cannot destroy what is already broken. The Duchess turned her gaze on her, hatred flashing beneath composure. You should have stayed where you belong. Julian moved to stand beside Elise. She belongs here, beside the truth you tried to bury. The Duchess's eyes flicked toward the fire, toward the stack of letters in Julian's hand. For an instant, Elise saw the shadow of desperation behind her calm. The older woman's voice dropped to a whisper that only they could hear. If you proceed, nephew, you will learn that the dead do not rest quietly. Some truths are buried for a reason. Julian's breath caught. What do you mean? Her gaze lingered on the pendant, then on Elise. Ask your precious Marie what she did before the end. Ask her what price she paid to keep that lark shining. Elise froze, the words cutting through her like ice. What are you saying? The Duchess smiled faintly, turning away. You seek the truth, my dear. Then prepare to bear it. And she left, her footsteps fading down the corridor, leaving them in silence that felt heavier than any accusation. The morning that followed was gray and quiet. A storm had passed during the night, leaving mist curling over the gardens and dew along the stone steps of the chateau. Elise awoke before sunrise. She had not truly slept. The Duchess's final words echoed in her mind like a bell she could not silence. Ask your precious Marie what she did before the end. What could she have meant? Her mother's last days had been full of gentleness, not secrets. Elise sat by the small fire, the pendant in her palm, and whispered, What did you do, Mama? What did you protect? When the door opened, Julian stood there, already dressed for the council. His expression was calm, but there was strain around his eyes. "You have not rested," he said. "Nor have you," she replied. He offered a faint smile. "Today it ends. The council will hear the truth. The Duchess can no longer hide behind titles and age." Elise rose. "But she said something last night. Something I cannot forget." Julian's gaze sharpened. "What?" "She told me to ask what price my mother paid to keep this lark shining." She held up the pendant. "Do you think she meant—" "No," he interrupted gently. "Do not let her poison your thoughts. Your mother saved mine. That is the truth we know." Elise nodded, but unease lingered in her chest. By the time the great bell rang 8, the council hall was full. The nobles gathered, whispering behind their hands, eyes darting toward the prince and the girl who stood beside him. The Duchess sat at the head of the table, her posture regal, her expression serene, as though the night before had never happened. Julian placed the sealed documents on the table. "Members of the council," he began. "For years my family has lived under a shadow. Lies have wrapped the death of my mother in confusion. Today I bring proof of what truly happened." A murmur rippled through the hall. The Duchess inclined her head slightly. "My nephew brings forward fantasies," she said. "Old letters, rumors from servants. Shall we give weight to such things over honor and tradition?" Julian's voice did not waver. "We give weight to truth. These letters were written by my mother herself, witnessed by her hand and sealed with the royal crest. They reveal that she was betrayed by one she trusted." He broke the seal and began to read aloud. The room fell silent except for his steady voice. Every word struck like a hammer on stone. The princess's fears, her suspicions, her warnings about the Duchess's ambitions. When he finished, no one spoke. The Duchess's fan trembled slightly in her hand. Finally, a gray-haired noble stood. "Your Grace," he said to her, "do you deny the seal?" "I deny the lies of a sick woman," she replied, "and the forgery of a desperate boy." Elise stepped forward, her voice clear and sure. "The words you call lies are the last of an honest woman who saw what you were capable of. My mother was with her until the final hour. She heard her confession." The Duchess's composure cracked. "Your mother was a thief." "She was a protector," Elise said. The council erupted in whispers again. Julian raised a hand for silence. "Enough. The truth has spoken. The time for pretense is over." He turned to his aunt. "You have ruled this estate in my name since I was a child. You have used its wealth for your own gain and silenced those who questioned you. It ends today." The Duchess's voice dropped to a hiss. "Do you truly think the crown will let you disgrace your own blood?" "I think the crown will honor justice." For a moment they stood in silence, 2 generations of power locked in a quiet battle. Then, slowly, the Duchess rose. "You will regret this," she said. "All of you." She turned and walked from the chamber, her retinue trailing after her like dark shadows. Julian let out a breath. "It is done." Elise looked around the hall. The nobles avoided her eyes, whispering to one another, uncertain which side to take, but none dared speak against the prince. When the doors closed, Julian turned to her. "Come. There is nothing more to prove here." They left the hall together and stepped into the courtyard. The mist had lifted. The first rays of sunlight touched the frost on the fountain, turning it to silver. Elise felt the weight that had pressed on her heart for weeks begin to lift. "Your mother is free," she said softly, "and mine can finally rest." Julian looked at her, his expression full of gratitude. "And you have given me back the truth. I owe you more than I can ever repay." She shook her head. "You owe me nothing. I only did what I had to." He smiled faintly. "Then perhaps I owe you my peace." They walked in silence through the gardens. For the first time since the night of the ball, the world around them felt quiet, as though waiting. The air smelled faintly of pine and cold earth. Julian stopped beside the old marble bench near the roses and turned to her. "There is something I must say before the world interferes again," he began. She hesitated, sensing the shift in his tone. "When I first saw you," he said, I saw only a stranger who dared what no one else would. You stood before me without title, without fear, and I despised you for it, because I envied it. I was a man imprisoned by pride. You broke that prison. Elise's throat tightened. I did not mean to, but you did, and now I find that I cannot imagine this house, this life, without you in it. She lowered her eyes. You forget who I am. I forget nothing, he said gently. You are the daughter of the woman who saved my mother's life. That alone makes you more noble than all the names in this court. She looked up at him, her lips trembling. You must not speak so. The court will never accept it. Let them whisper, he said. They have whispered all my life. I am tired of living for their approval. For a moment, she could not speak. The sun broke through the clouds, lighting his face, and she saw in his eyes not the proud prince who had humiliated her, but the man who had fought for truth against his own blood. She took a step back, her heart pounding. Do not say more, not yet. The wound of last night is still too fresh. He nodded slowly. Then I will wait. But know this, Elise Laurent. I will not let pride rob me of happiness again. She turned away to hide the tears. She could not stop. Later that day, news spread through the chateau that the Duchess had left for her country estate. She departed in silence, leaving her apartments sealed behind her. Julien ordered that no harm come to her, only that her influence in Beaumont's affairs end forever. The servants began to speak of a new peace returning to the house. The corridors felt lighter, as though years of shadow had lifted. Elise spent the afternoon helping the steward organize the recovered papers. When she returned to the library, Julien was there, gazing at the portrait of his mother. He turned as she entered. She looks proud, Elise said softly. She was, but she was also kind. I wish you could have known her. In a way, I think I did, Elise murmured. Through the stories my mother told me. He studied her for a moment, then spoke quietly. I remember the night before she died. She said the world would change soon. That kindness would become rarer. She told me never to let fear dictate what I choose to love. Elise's heart ached at the words. Then she left you a greater inheritance than wealth. Julien smiled faintly. Perhaps she also left me you. She lowered her gaze, unable to answer. Evening came. A soft rain began to fall, pattering gently against the windows. The fire in the library glowed warm and steady. They sat together, speaking little. The silence between them was not heavy now. It was peace. Julien leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. I have thought often of that night at the ball, he said. If I could change one thing, it would be my words to you. You cannot change the past, she replied. No, but perhaps I can build a future worthy of apology. Elise turned her face toward the window, watching the rain streak the glass. What will you do now? He was quiet for a moment before answering. The council will confirm my title officially next week. After that, I wish to restore what my mother began. Schools, orphanages, lands for those who serve this house. It is time Beaumont stood for mercy again. She smiled faintly. She would be proud. I hope so. The rain softened into mist. The fire burned lower. For a long time, neither spoke. Then, Elise rose. It is late. I should go. Julien stood as well. Elise, thank you. For everything. She hesitated at the doorway. You once said truth destroys more than lies. Perhaps that is true, but sometimes it also frees. Their eyes met for a long, quiet moment. When she was gone, Julien looked again at his mother's portrait. For the first time in years, he felt the house breathe. The next morning, the chateau stirred with preparations for peace. The council drafted new documents. The servants moved with unhurried steps. Julien oversaw everything with calm authority. Elise worked beside the steward in the archives, cataloguing letters for safekeeping. That evening, when she returned to her chamber, she found a small parcel on her bed. Inside was a folded note written in Julien's hand, for the truth that binds us both. Beneath it lay a simple gold chain, without pendant. She smiled faintly and touched the lark already resting at her throat. As the days passed, gossip faded. The Duchess's name was spoken less and less, until she became a ghost of the past. Peace, fragile but real, settled over the chateau. On the final day of the week, The council met one last time to seal the documents restoring the estate to Julian's full authority. When it ended, the prince sought Elise in the gardens. He found her beneath the old linden tree, her hands folded around the pendant. "It is finished," he said. She smiled. "Then the ghosts may sleep." "Not all of them," he murmured. "Some remain to guide us." The wind lifted her hair gently, and for a moment, neither moved. Then Julian reached into his coat and drew out the silver ring, the Beaumont seal he had given her in the barn. "You once told me my word meant little," he said. "I give it again now, not as a prince to his subject, but as one heart to another." She stared at him, speechless. "Julian," he raised a hand, "you need not answer now. Only know that when you are ready, my home is yours." Her eyes filled with tears. "You are too generous. I am only learning what generosity truly means." The sun slipped behind the hills, casting the gardens in gold. Elise looked at him for a long time, then nodded once. The air between them held everything unspoken. Gratitude, forgiveness, a quiet promise. The story that had begun in humiliation now trembled on the edge of something far gentler, far stronger. The Duchess was gone, the truth was known, and the wounds of the past had begun to heal. Julian reached for her hand, his voice no more than a whisper. "Stay." She hesitated only a moment before her fingers slipped into his. The story that had started with pride had come to peace, and love waited only a breath away. The morning of the celebration dawned bright and clear. Bells rang from the chapel tower of Château de Beaumont, echoing across the valley. Servants hurried through the corridors carrying flowers, ribbons, trays of silver, and freshly pressed linens. For the first time in years, the chateau was alive with joy instead of whispers. Elise stood by her window, her heart racing. She wore a gown of soft cream, simple but beautiful, a gift from the prince himself. The fabric shimmered faintly in the sunlight. She ran her fingers over the pendant resting against her throat. The golden lark that had once been a symbol of sorrow, and now gleamed with peace. Outside, the garden was being prepared for the evening ball. Musicians tuned their instruments beneath the linden trees, and laughter drifted through the open windows. The people of the nearby village had been invited as well. It would be a celebration not just for the court, but for everyone who called Beaumont home. Madame Colette, now the castle's guest of honor, entered Elise's room, smiling warmly. "You look radiant, my dear. The prince will lose his breath when he sees you." Elise blushed. "You make me nervous, madame." "Good. A little nervousness reminds us that we are alive." She adjusted a strand of Elise's hair, then stepped back. "Go now. Let the past stay behind those walls." Elise nodded. Her heart fluttered as she made her way through the corridor. The light spilling through the tall windows painted everything golden. For the first time, the castle no longer felt like a prison of marble and duty. It felt like home. Downstairs, Julian waited at the foot of the grand staircase. He wore a dark blue coat, his mother's crest embroidered over the heart. His gaze was fixed on the staircase, but his mind wandered back to the night months ago when a trembling girl had entered his ballroom uninvited. How far they had come since then. How much he had learned from her courage. Then he saw her. Elise descended slowly, her hands steady, despite the storm within her chest. Julian forgot to breathe. The crowd parted silently as she approached. When she reached the last step, he bowed deeply. "Welcome to Beaumont," he said, his voice quiet but full. She smiled. "This time, I was invited." The words carried through the hall, and gentle laughter followed. Julian extended his hand, and she placed hers in it. The orchestra began to play. The same melody that had once accompanied her humiliation now rose again. But tonight, it was no longer cruel. It was tender, triumphant. As they danced, the court watched in awe. The prince and the commoner moved as though the world had paused for them alone. Each turn of the waltz erased the memory of the night that had once broken them both. When the song ended, the applause came like rain, warm and thunderous. Julian led her out to the terrace, away from the crowd. The air was cool, carrying the scent of roses. Lanterns glowed softly along the balustrade, their flames flickering in the breeze. "You've changed everything," he said quietly. Elise looked at him, her heart full. "You changed yourself, Julian. I only held a mirror." He took her hand again, his thumb brushing against her skin. "When I thought I had lost honor, you showed me what it truly means. When I thought I had no heart left to give, you proved me wrong." She tried to speak, but emotion stole her voice. He reached into his coat and withdrew a small velvet box. "This belonged to my mother," he said. "It was her wish that it be given to the one who would teach me what love truly is." He opened it. Inside lay a delicate ring of gold set with a single sapphire, the color of dawn sky after rain. Elise froze. "Julian." He went down on one knee, his eyes never leaving hers. "Elise Laurent, daughter of Marie, bearer of truth and light. Will you share your life with me? Not as a servant, not as a guest, but as my wife, my equal, my peace." Tears filled her eyes. "You would marry me? Before all of France? Before heaven itself," he said softly. The music from the ballroom drifted through the doors, but all sound seemed to vanish around them. She trembled, her hands covering her mouth, then whispered, "Yes." The single word carried more power than any oath. The terrace erupted with applause, as those who had been watching from the doors began to cheer. The orchestra struck a jubilant chord, and the night came alive with laughter and bells. Julian rose, placing the ring gently on her finger. He drew her close, his forehead resting against hers. "You have no idea how long I have waited to hear that word." She smiled through her tears. "You have no idea how long I have waited to believe in hope again." They returned to the ballroom together, hand in hand. Word of their engagement spread instantly. The courtiers who had once mocked Elise now bowed deeply, their voices full of sudden reverence. The servants smiled from the edges of the room. They had seen enough to know this love was not made of politics or pride, but of truth. The dancing began again. Julian and Elise led the first waltz. The room glowed with candlelight, and every step they took seemed to weave together the pieces of their story. The night of shame, the discovery of the letters, the confrontation, the forgiveness. It was all there, yet transformed. As they moved, Elise caught sight of the portrait of the late princess hanging above the hall. The painted eyes seemed to watch them with calm approval. A single thought crossed Elise's mind. "She sees us." When the music ended, Julian guided her to the center of the room and raised his glass. "To Marie Laurent," he said, his voice clear and strong, "who kept her promise even after death. To my mother, who believed truth would rise, and to Elise, who gave them both peace." The hall echoed with cheers. Elise lowered her head, her heart overflowing. Later, when the crowd thinned and the musicians packed away their instruments, Julian led her out into the gardens. The moon was bright, the fountains silver. Fireflies hovered over the hedges like tiny stars. He took off his coat and placed it over her shoulders. "Do you remember the first time we stood here?" She laughed softly. "You mean when you called the guards to have me thrown out?" He winced playfully. "Yes, that regrettable moment." She turned toward him, teasing. "I suppose I should thank you. Had you not done so, none of this would have happened." He smiled. "Then allow me to correct my error properly." He stepped closer, his hand finding hers. For a moment, the only sound was the quiet murmur of water. "Julian," she whispered. "May I?" She nodded. He kissed her gently, with a reverence that spoke of every word they had never said aloud. It was not the kiss of a prince claiming possession, but of a man offering his heart without pride. When they drew apart, Elise could hardly breathe. "I think," he said softly, "that my mother was right. The lark does rise, even after the storm." Elise rested her head against his chest, and it sings again. They stood there for a long time, silent, watching the moon climb higher. Somewhere in the distance, the bells began to ring once more. The weeks that followed were filled with preparations. The wedding would take place in the chapel overlooking the river, the same one where Julian's parents had been wed. Invitations were sent across the province, and even the villagers, who had once been kept from the gates, were invited to celebrate. Elise spent her mornings with Madame Colette, choosing flowers and music. The afternoons she spent with Julien, overseeing the rebuilding of the orphanage his mother had once planned. Together they walked among the workers, speaking to them by name, listening to their stories. The people grew to love them, not as rulers, but as friends. On the morning of the wedding, the sky was clear again, pale and endless. The bells began before sunrise, calling everyone to the chapel. Elise walked the path lined with roses, her gown flowing softly around her. The pendant lay over her heart, and her mother's ring, newly polished, rested on her right hand. Julian waited at the altar, his expression full of light. When she reached him, she forgot the crowd, the whispers, the ceremony. There was only him, standing before her, the man she had once feared and now loved beyond reason. The priest's voice faded to the edge of her hearing. When Julian spoke his vows, his hands trembled slightly, but his words were steady. "You entered my life as a storm," he said, "and from that storm came every truth I needed to see. I vow to stand beside you in every calm and every tempest, for as long as God grants me breath." Her own voice was a whisper, but every heart in the chapel heard it. "You taught me that forgiveness is stronger than pride, and love is greater than fear. I vow to keep that truth alive in all our days." When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, the applause was thunderous. Julian turned to her, eyes shining. "My princess," he said. She laughed softly. "You're equal." They walked out of the chapel together beneath a shower of rose petals. The bells rang louder, and the people cheered their names. Children danced, old men wept, and even the skeptical courtiers smiled behind their lace and brocade. That evening, the chateau blazed with light once more. The chandeliers sparkled like stars. The gardens were alive with music and laughter. Yet the greatest joy was quiet, resting in the glance they shared whenever their eyes met across the room. As the night deepened, Julian took her hand again and led her to the balcony. Below them, fireworks burst into gold and silver above the river. He turned to her, his voice low. "You see that light? It belongs to us now." Elise nodded, tears glimmering. "Then let it never fade." He brushed his thumb across her cheek. "It never will. Not as long as you wear that lark." She touched the pendant, smiling through her tears. "It will always remind me that truth can bring love out of even the darkest night." He pulled her close, his arms around her as the fireworks reflected in her eyes. The crowd below cheered again, but their world had narrowed to the space of a heartbeat. The sound of their breathing, the warmth of his chest against her, the soft promise in his whisper. "Elise," he said, "you are my beginning and my end." She closed her eyes, her voice trembling, "And you are my freedom." Above them, the final firework burst into 1,000 shimmering lights, casting their faces in gold. The story that had begun with humiliation ended in hope. The prince who once cast her out now held her as his queen. The girl who had once begged for truth now lived it. And as the last echo of the bells faded across the valley, they stood together on the balcony of Beaumont, where the lark of gold gleamed against her heart, and the promise of their love shone brighter than the dawn. Thank you so much for listening to this story, all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a show of support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotion and life lessons. And before we go, we want to remind you that an exciting and heartwarming story recommendation will appear on the final screen. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.